The massive space station turned slowly against the orange glow of Kepler 442b. Nexus Station looked like a giant metal flower with 12 petals stretching out from its center. Each petal housed a different species during the annual Galactic Cooperation Summit. The station had been built 30 years ago as neutral ground where all species could meet safely. Commander Taman stood at the observation deck of the Corvin section, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. His dark uniform was perfectly pressed, and his posture showed years of military training. The Corvin Defense Fleet had chosen him to lead their delegation because of his reputation for staying calm under pressure. "Sir, the Zenthari merchants have docked," Lieutenant Minji reported as she approached. She carried a data tablet and wore the blue uniform of diplomatic staff. Minji had spent 5 years learning the customs and languages of different species. Her job was to make sure the Corvins did not accidentally insult anyone during the summit. "Any problems with their arrival?" Taman asked without turning from the window. None reported. They brought 3 cargo ships full of trade samples. The station's security cleared them without issues. Taman nodded. The Zenthari were peaceful merchants who traveled between star systems selling exotic goods. They caused fewer problems than most species at these summits. It was the others he worried about. A new ship appeared outside the window. It was sleek and white with blue markings. The human vessel looked smaller than the others, but Taman knew humans built their ships for speed rather than size. The human delegation is arriving now, Minji observed, checking her tablet. Dr. Yuna Park and Captain Hyunwoo, along with a small security team. Taman had read the files on both humans. Dr. Park was young for a diplomatic representative, only 28 years old. She worked as a xenobiologist, studying how different species lived and behaved. Captain Hyunwoo commanded the escort ship, but had little experience with formal diplomacy. "Humans always arrive on schedule," Taman said. "They are precise about time." "Yes, sir." Their culture values punctuality highly. The human ship docked at the neutral section of the station. Taman watched the small figures exit through the airlock. Even at this distance, he could see how much smaller humans were compared to most galactic species. They stood barely chest-high to an average Corvin. "Sir, there is something else," Minji said, her voice becoming more serious. "What is it?" The Vorthak delegation arrived an hour early. War Speaker Grath is already aboard. Taman turned away from the window. The Vorthak were the reason he had been chosen for this mission instead of a career diplomat. The reptilian species had been growing more aggressive in recent years. They still practiced ritual combat to settle disputes and choose leaders. Many other species found them difficult to work with. Where is Grath now? In their section, but he has been asking questions about the other delegations, specifically about humans. This was concerning news. The Vorthak had never shown much interest in humanity before. They usually ignored species they considered too weak to be worth their attention. What kind of questions? Military capacity, fleet size, defensive capabilities. Station security logged the inquiries as routine diplomatic intelligence gathering. Taman considered this information. Perhaps the Vorthak were finally taking humans seriously as competitors in trade or territory. Or perhaps they saw an opportunity to expand their influence by pressuring a smaller species. "Keep monitoring the situation. I want to know if Grath makes any direct contact with the human delegation." "Yes, sir." The next few hours passed as delegations settled into their quarters and prepared for the opening ceremonies. Taman reviewed files on each species while Minji coordinated with station staff to ensure smooth operations. The opening ceremony took place in the central hub of the station. Representatives from 12 species gathered in a large circular chamber with viewing ports showing the gas giant below. Each delegation sat in sections marked with their species symbols. Director Vulcan, a tall gray alien from the neutral Nexari species, welcomed everyone to the summit. The Nexari had built and maintained the station since its creation. They served as hosts because they had no territorial ambitions and rarely took sides in disputes. "Welcome to the 42nd Annual Galactic Cooperation Summit," Director Vulcan announced in the common trade language. "We gather here to discuss mutual concerns and strengthen the bonds between our civilizations." Taman listened to the traditional speeches while observing the other delegations. The Zenthari merchants looked relaxed and friendly. The crystalline Vectar remained motionless in their environmental suits. The aquatic Sithari swam slowly in their mobile water tanks. His attention focused on the human section. Dr. Una Park sat quietly taking notes on a small tablet. She wore a simple gray uniform with no military decorations. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical style. She looked more like a university student than a diplomatic representative. Captain Hyunwoo sat beside her in a dark blue uniform with human fleet markings. He appeared uncomfortable with the formal ceremony, shifting in his chair and checking his communication device frequently. In the Vorthak section, War Speaker Grath dominated the space around him. The reptilian stood nearly 3 meters tall, with scaled green skin and yellow eyes. His Lieutenant Korak sat nearby, both of them wearing ceremonial armor decorated with symbols of their military victories. Grath was staring directly at the human delegation. His gaze moved between Dr. Park and Captain Hyunwoo with obvious interest. Taman noticed that other species representatives were also watching this silent exchange. The ceremony concluded with announcements about the next day's schedule. There would be formal sessions in the morning, followed by cultural exchange activities in the evening. The cultural exchange was usually the most relaxed part of the summit, where representatives could interact informally. As delegations began to leave the chamber, Taman saw Grath approach one of his aides and whisper something. The aide nodded and left quickly. War Speaker Grath then walked over to where other military representatives were gathering. "Lieutenant, arrange a private meeting with Captain Hyunwoo if possible," Taman instructed Minji. "I want to discuss security arrangements for tomorrow evening." "Yes, sir. Any particular concerns?" "Just a feeling that tomorrow's cultural exchange might be more interesting than usual." Minji nodded and made notes on her tablet. She had learned to trust her commander's instincts about potential problems. As the delegations returned to their quarters, the station settled into its night cycle. The lights dimmed to simulate planetary darkness, and the constant hum of life support systems became more noticeable in the quiet corridors. Taman stood once again at his observation window, watching the stars beyond the gas giant. Tomorrow would bring the real work of diplomacy. Treaties would be discussed, trade agreements negotiated, and old disputes revisited. But something about War Speaker Grath's behavior suggested that tomorrow might also bring unexpected challenges. The Vorthak leader had looked at the humans with the expression of a predator, sizing up potential prey. Taman hoped his instincts were wrong, but 30 years of military service had taught him to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. The station continued its slow rotation, carrying 12 species toward an uncertain tomorrow. The cultural exchange dinner took place in the station's grand dining hall. Long tables formed a circle around a central area where different species could display their traditional foods and customs. The lighting was warm and soft, designed to make all species feel comfortable. Dr. Una Park entered the hall wearing a simple black dress with small silver decorations. She carried her ever-present tablet and moved quietly to the human table. Captain Hyunwoo joined her, looking stiff, in his formal dress uniform. "Any interesting observations so far?" Captain Hyunwoo asked as they took their seats. "Several," Una replied, opening her tablet. "The Vorthak delegation has been asking other species about human military capabilities. War Speaker Grath seems particularly curious about our defensive systems. Should we be concerned?" "Not yet, but it's worth monitoring." Around the hall, other delegations were settling in for the evening. The Zenthari had brought samples of rare spices and exotic fruits. The crystalline Vectar displayed beautiful light patterns that served as their form of art. The aquatic Sithari swam in portable tanks, while their translators explained their culture. Commander Taman sat with the Corvin delegation at a nearby table. Lieutenant Minji was deep in conversation with a Zenthari trade representative about shipping routes. The atmosphere seemed relaxed and friendly. War Speaker Grath arrived fashionably late, as was typical for high-ranking Vorthak. He wore ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine. His Lieutenant Korax followed close behind, both of them scanning the room like predators entering new territory. The evening began pleasantly enough. Representatives shared stories about their homeworlds and discussed various cultural traditions. The Zenthari merchant Prince Velox entertained nearby tables with tales of exotic planets and strange customs he had encountered during his travels. But as the evening progressed and various alcoholic beverages were consumed, the conversations began to shift toward more serious topics. Trade disputes that had been simmering for months started to surface. The problem, Velox declared, his voice growing louder, is that newer species don't respect established trade routes. They undercut prices and disrupt markets that took centuries to develop. His eyes focused on the human table. Humans, for example, have been offering shipping services at rates that make no economic sense. They must be operating at a loss to gain market share. Captain Hyunwoo shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our shipping costs are lower because our ships are more efficient. We're not trying to harm anyone's business. Efficient or not, you're damaging relationships that go back generations, another Zenthari representative added. The tension in the room began to rise. Other species turned to watch the developing argument. Dr. Park continued taking notes, observing how different delegates reacted to conflict. War Speaker Grath had been listening silently while consuming large quantities of Zenthari wine. The alcohol seemed to have little effect on his massive frame, but it made him more talkative than usual. Trade disputes, he said loudly, standing up from his table. Always the same complaints, always the same problems. His voice carried across the entire dining hall. Conversations at other tables stopped as everyone turned to listen. You know what solves trade disputes? Grath continued, walking toward the center of the room. Strength, clear demonstrations of power. When everyone knows who is strongest, there are no more arguments about shipping routes or market prices. Lieutenant. Korax nodded in agreement from their table. Several other Vorthak delegates began to pay closer attention to their leader's words. Take humans, for instance, Grath said, gesturing casually toward Dr. Park and Captain Hyunwoo. Small creatures, soft skin, no natural weapons. They cause problems because they don't understand their proper place. The hall became completely quiet. Even the background noise of the station's life support system seemed louder in the sudden silence. Commander Taman sat forward in his chair, his military instincts warning him of danger. Lieutenant Minji stopped her conversation and began taking careful notes. The solution is simple, Grath continued, his yellow eyes gleaming with alcohol and amusement. A species like the Vorthak could eliminate humanity in a matter of weeks, maybe days. We have the ships, the weapons, the warriors. Captain Hyunwoo started to stand up, but Dr. Park placed a gentle hand on his arm. She was watching War Speaker Grath with intense interest. Humans have, 50 colonies? Grath asked rhetorically. A few dozen ships? Maybe 100,000 total population spread across multiple star systems? He laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. We could hit every human world simultaneously. They would be gone before they could even send distress signals to each other. Other delegates began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This kind of talk was exactly what the summit was supposed to prevent. Director Vulcan, the Nexari host, was moving toward the center of the room to intervene. Of course, Grath added with another laugh. It would be over so quickly it wouldn't even be entertaining. No sport in hunting prey that can't fight back. He raised his glass toward the human table in a mock toast. Nothing personal, you understand. Just simple military mathematics. The silence in the room was now complete. Every delegate was watching to see how the humans would respond to such a direct threat. Some expected anger. Others feared the diplomatic incident that was surely about to unfold. Dr. Yuna Park looked up from her tablet where she had been taking notes throughout Grath's speech. She set the device down carefully and gave the war speaker her full attention. Then she smiled. It was not the reaction anyone had expected. The smile was genuine, warm, and completely unexpected. She looked like someone who had just heard the most interesting story of the evening. That's fascinating, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Please, tell me more about your tactical assessment. War Speaker Grath stopped mid-gesture, his raised glass forgotten. He had expected fear, anger, or diplomatic protests. He had not expected genuine academic interest. The smile never left Dr. Park's face as she waited for his response. Around the room, delegates began to realize that something very unusual was happening. The human wasn't intimidated. She was intrigued, and that made everything much more dangerous than a simple diplomatic incident. War Speaker Grath stared at Dr. Una Park for several long seconds. Her smile remained steady and genuinely interested. Around the dining hall, other delegates held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "You want to know more?" Grath asked, confusion clear in his voice. He had expected the human to be afraid or angry, not curious. "Absolutely," Una replied, leaning forward slightly. "Military strategy is fascinating, especially when it involves species with different capabilities. How would you coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously?" The war speaker blinked his large yellow eyes. This was not how threats usually worked. Most species either backed down or became hostile when faced with Vorthak military might. "Well," he began slowly, "the key is speed and coordination. Strike all targets at the same time so they cannot warn each other or organize resistance." "That makes perfect sense," Una said, nodding appreciatively. "What about supply lines?" "Coordinated attacks across dozens of light years would require extensive logistical support." Grath found himself drawn into the academic discussion despite his confusion. "Vorthak fleets are self-sufficient for extended campaigns. We carry our own fuel processing equipment and food production facilities." "Impressive," Una said, making notes on her tablet. "And communication between fleet elements during the operation?" "Quantum entanglement communication devices allow instant contact across any distance," Grath explained, warming to the subject. "Each fleet commander receives updates in real time." Commander Taman watched this exchange with growing alarm. Dr. Park was not just asking random questions. She was systematically extracting detailed information about Vorthak military capabilities, command structure, and tactical doctrine. Captain Hyunwoo realized what his colleague was doing and worked hard to keep his expression neutral. He had seen Una use similar techniques during academic conferences, getting experts to reveal far more than they intended. Lieutenant Minji recognized the interrogation method from her psychological warfare training. The human was using the Vorthak's own arrogance against him, letting him boast while gathering intelligence. "How do you handle defensive installations?" Una asked. "Some species have orbital defense platforms that could cause problems for attacking fleets." "Simple," Grath replied, now fully engaged in showing off his military knowledge. "Vorthak doctrine calls for overwhelming force. We bring 10 ships for every defender. No defense can withstand that kind of firepower." 10-1, Una repeated, thoughtfully. "That's a significant resource commitment. How many ships does the Vorthak fleet have total?" "Nearly 2,000 combat vessels," Grath said proudly, "plus support ships, transport vessels, and orbital bombardment platforms." Around the room, other delegates were beginning to take their own notes. Information about Vorthak military strength was usually closely guarded. War Speaker Grath was revealing state secrets while thinking he was giving a lecture on military superiority and troop strength. Una continued seamlessly. "Each ship carries a full combat unit. Vorthak warriors are worth 5 soldiers from any other species," Grath boasted. "I don't doubt it," Una said sincerely. "Your reputation for combat effectiveness is well known. But what about occupation forces? Destroying a species is one thing, but controlling territory afterward requires different skills." Grath paused, considering this question. "We usually don't worry about occupation. Dead enemies don't require management." "True," Una agreed, "though total extinction does limit future economic opportunities. No trade, no tribute, no resources from those systems. The Vorthak take what we need and move on," Grath said, but his tone was less confident than before. "Of course," Una nodded. "Though I'm curious about the timeline. You mentioned eliminating humanity in weeks or days. That seems optimistic for 50 colonies spread across such a large area." "Vorthak fleets are fast," Grath insisted. "Our ships can cross the galaxy in months." "Certainly," Una agreed. But there are practical considerations: survey data, target identification, fleet positioning. Even with perfect coordination, the preparation time alone would be substantial. Commander Taman noticed that Dr. Park's questions were becoming more pointed. She was no longer just gathering information about Vorthak capabilities. She was highlighting potential problems with their proposed strategy. "Preparation is handled by our advanced scouts," Grath said, sounding slightly defensive. "We have ships monitoring all major species." "Including humans?" Yuna asked with that same interested smile. "Of course. We know the location of every human colony, the strength of your defenses, the patrol routes of your ships." "That's very thorough," Yuna said approvingly. "Though surveillance data can become outdated quickly." "When was your last comprehensive assessment of human capabilities?" Grath hesitated. "Our information is current." "I'm sure it is," Yuna replied. "It's just that humans have been expanding rapidly in recent years. New colonies, new ship designs, new defensive technologies. It must be challenging to keep track of all the changes." Around the table, other delegates were beginning to sense a shift in the conversation. Dr. Park's tone remained friendly and academic, but her questions were becoming more challenging. "Vorthak intelligence is very good," Grath said, but he sounded less certain than before. "I don't doubt it," Yuna said. "Though I notice you mentioned 50 human colonies. That number hasn't been accurate for several years now." Silence fell over the dining hall again. This time it was different from before. War Speaker Grath was no longer the confident predator describing an easy hunt. He was beginning to realize that his intelligence might not be as complete as he had believed. "How many colonies do humans have now?" asked Velox, the Zenthari merchant. His business required accurate information about human expansion. Dr. Park consulted her tablet briefly. "The exact number is classified, but it's significantly more than 50. Our expansion rate has accelerated considerably in recent years." She looked back at Grath with that same pleasant smile. "It's an easy mistake to make. Humans do tend to establish new settlements rather quietly. We prefer to have defensive systems in place before announcing new colonies publicly." The War Speaker's confident posture was beginning to crack. If his basic intelligence about human population centers was wrong, what else might be incorrect? "Perhaps," Yuna continued conversationally, "it would be interesting to compare notes. I'd love to hear more about Vorthak's strategic planning, and I might be able to fill in some gaps in your information about human capabilities." The offer sounded innocent enough, but everyone in the room understood what she was really saying. The human was no longer just answering questions about her species' vulnerability. She was offering to educate the Vorthak about exactly how dangerous that vulnerability might be to attack. Dr. Yuna Park activated her tablet's holographic display, projecting images above the dining table. The first image showed a blue and green planet, covered with swirling white clouds. "This is Earth, the human homeworld," she said in the same conversational tone she had maintained throughout the evening. "Beautiful planet, very stable climate, perfect for supporting life." War Speaker Grath leaned forward to study the image, as did several other delegates. The planet looked peaceful and inviting. "Earth has experienced several extinction events throughout its history," Yuna continued. "Asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, climate changes. Each event eliminated most life on the planet." She touched the tablet and the image changed, showing a frozen wasteland covered in ice and snow. The most recent ice age ended only 12,000 years ago. During that period, the human population dropped to fewer than 10,000 individuals. We almost went extinct. The delegates around the table listened with interest. Many species had similar stories about near-extinction events on their homeworlds. "The interesting thing about humans," Yuna said, "is how we responded to these challenges. Instead of just surviving, we learned to prepare for the next crisis." The holographic display shifted again, showing human settlements spreading across Earth's surface, then expanding to nearby planets and star systems. Humans developed this habit of spreading out, establishing backup colonies, creating redundant systems. We learned that putting all our people in one place was dangerous. Commander. Taman studied the expansion pattern with his military eye. The human settlements were not randomly placed. They formed a defensive network with overlapping coverage and mutual support capabilities. By the time we developed space travel, Yuna continued, this behavior was deeply ingrained in our culture. We don't just establish colonies for resources or trade. We establish them for survival. She brought up new images showing human ships and stations scattered throughout their territory. Every human colony is designed to be self-sufficient if necessary. Every settlement has defensive capabilities. Every outpost can support itself indefinitely without outside help. War Speaker Grath was beginning to look uncomfortable. The casual elimination of humanity was seeming less simple with each piece of information. Of course, defense is only part of the equation, Yuna said. Humans also learned the importance of early warning systems. The holographic display now showed a complex network of communication relays, sensor stations and monitoring posts extending far beyond human territory. We maintain observation posts in neutral systems, monitoring stations along major trade routes and communication networks that can operate even under hostile conditions. It's very difficult to approach human space without being detected. Lieutenant Minji was taking detailed notes, recognizing the description of a military intelligence network far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. But detection is only useful if you can respond quickly, Yuna continued. That's why human ships are built for speed rather than size. We can redeploy our forces faster than most species can track our movements. She showed images of sleek human vessels that looked more like racing ships than military craft. Small, fast, difficult to target, she explained. They carry powerful weapons relative to their size, and they can operate independently for extended periods. Very hard to pin down in a fight. Grath was now openly concerned. His earlier assessment of human military weakness was being systematically dismantled by the human's own cultural presentation. The real key to human survival strategy, Yuna said, is something we learned from those extinction events. The most dangerous time is not during the crisis itself, but immediately afterward. She paused to take a sip of water, letting the statement hang in the air. Explain that, said Velox, the Zenthari merchant. He was as interested as everyone else in understanding human thinking. Well, Yuna said, during a crisis everyone is focused on immediate survival, but after the immediate threat passes, that's when you need to rebuild, regroup, and most importantly, prepare for the next threat. The holographic display showed human colonies that had been damaged or destroyed in various conflicts, then showed the same locations years later with stronger defenses and larger populations. Humans have this tendency to become more dangerous after being attacked. We analyze what went wrong, develop countermeasures, and make sure the same attack won't work twice. She looked directly at War Speaker Grath. It's a survival trait we developed over millions of years of facing extinction. Every threat that doesn't completely eliminate us makes us harder to eliminate next time. The silence in the dining hall was now heavy with tension. What had started as boastful threats from the Vorthak was turning into something much more serious. For example, Yuna continued, consulting her tablet, humans have developed detailed contingency plans for various hostile scenarios. Coordinated, multi-system attacks, orbital bombardments, biological warfare, economic blockades. We've run simulations and developed responses for all of them. Commander Taman realized that Dr. Park was describing military planning that went far beyond simple defense. The humans had been preparing for aggressive action by other species. The fascinating part, Yuna said, is how human responses tend to escalate. If someone destroys one of our colonies, we don't just rebuild it. We rebuild it stronger and establish 2 more colonies nearby. If someone attacks our trade ships, we don't just improve their defenses. We start escorting them with warships. She brought up images of human defensive installations that looked far more heavily armed than anyone had expected. It's not that humans are naturally aggressive, she explained. We actually prefer peaceful cooperation. But we've learned that the best way to maintain peace is to be extremely well prepared for war. War Speaker Grath was no longer looking confident. The easy prey he had described earlier was beginning to look like a very dangerous opponent. How well prepared? Asked a delegate from the crystalline Vectar species, Dr. Park smiled that same pleasant smile she had worn all evening. Let's just say that if anyone ever attempted the kind of coordinated attack War Speaker Grath described earlier, they would discover that humans have been expecting exactly that scenario. She touched her tablet one final time, and the holographic display showed a map of the local galaxy, with human territory marked in blue. Surrounding it were dozens of red dots, indicating monitoring stations, defensive positions, and what could only be military installations. We've been preparing for the last 30 years, she said simply, ever since we joined the galactic community and realized that not all species were as peaceful as we hoped. The image made it clear that anyone attacking humanity would not be facing 50 lightly defended colonies. They would be attacking a prepared enemy with extensive intelligence networks, defensive positions throughout the region, and contingency plans for every possible threat. War Speaker Grath stared at the display in silence, finally understanding that his casual threats had revealed far more about Vorthak capabilities than they had intimidated the humans. The dinner had become a very different kind of educational exchange than anyone had planned. The holographic display showing human defensive positions remained active above the dining table. Other delegates began sharing their own encounters with human capabilities, each story adding to a picture that was very different from what most had believed. Now that Dr. Park mentions it, said Velox, the Zenthari merchant, human trading ships do seem to appear in the most unusual places. Last year, during the Kepler sector conflict, human vessels were somehow present at every major battle site. He paused thoughtfully. They claimed to be delivering humanitarian aid, but they always arrived just as the fighting ended. Perfect timing for gathering intelligence. Dr. Una Park nodded appreciatively. Humans do take our humanitarian obligations seriously. We believe in helping species recover from conflicts. Even conflicts they had no involvement in, added another Zenthari representative. Human medical ships, supply vessels, communications relays, always ready to assist. Commander Taman was beginning to understand the implications. Dr. Park, are you saying that humanitarian missions serve multiple purposes? Not at all, Una replied with innocent surprise. Humanitarian aid is exactly what it appears to be. The fact that such missions also provide opportunities to study different military technologies and tactical approaches is simply a beneficial side effect. War Speaker Grath was looking increasingly uncomfortable. You're describing an intelligence-gathering network disguised as charity work. I'm describing humans helping other species while learning about galactic military capabilities, Una corrected gently. There's nothing secretive about it. We're quite open about studying different approaches to warfare and defense. Lieutenant Minji spoke up for the first time. The Corvin Defense Fleet has worked with human advisors during several recent conflicts. They were extremely knowledgeable about enemy tactics and defensive strategies. Human military advisors seem to understand every species' combat doctrines better than those species understand them themselves, added a delegate from the aquatic Zenthari. During our border dispute with the hegemony, human advisors predicted enemy movements with perfect accuracy. Dr. Park consulted her tablet again. Humans do maintain extensive databases on military conflicts throughout the galaxy. We analyze battle reports, study tactical innovations, and track the effectiveness of different strategic approaches. She looked up at the assembled delegates. It's part of our survival preparation. The more we understand about how different species fight, the better we can defend ourselves if necessary. Or attack if necessary, Grath said grimly. Defense and offense often use the same capabilities, Una agreed. The difference is usually in intent and timing. Commander Taman had been studying the holographic display of human positions. Dr. Park, these monitoring stations around human space, how long have they been in place? The network has been expanding, gradually for about 15 years, she replied. We started with basic communication relays and sensor stations. Over time, we've added more sophisticated monitoring equipment and defensive capabilities. Defensive capabilities? Asked Velox. Standard precautions, automated defense platforms, missile systems, electronic warfare equipment. Nothing too aggressive, just enough to make attacking them more trouble than most species would consider worthwhile. The casual way she described weapon systems that could threaten entire fleets made several delegates shift nervously in their seats. The interesting thing about this network, Yuna continued, is how it integrates with our civilian infrastructure. Human trading posts, research stations, and colonial outposts all contribute sensor data and communication relay services. She brought up a new display showing the density of human civilian presence throughout the region. The coverage was far more extensive than anyone had realized. Every human merchant ship, exploration vessel, and transport carries sensors and communication equipment. They automatically report unusual activities, ship movements, and potential threats. Lieutenant Korax, who had been silent throughout the evening, finally spoke. "You're describing a military surveillance network that spans dozens of star systems." "I'm describing a community of humans who look out for each other," Yuna corrected. "It's basic survival behavior. When you're spread across multiple star systems, communication and mutual awareness become essential." War Speaker Grath was staring at the holographic displays with growing alarm. How many ships does humanity actually have? The exact numbers are classified for security reasons, Yuna said. But I can say that our expansion has required substantial fleet construction. New colonies need transport, supplies, and protection. How substantial? Grath pressed. Dr. Park considered the question carefully. Let me put it this way. The human fleet is designed to support our current territorial requirements and future expansion plans. It's also designed to defend against the kind of coordinated, multi-system attack you described earlier. She touched her tablet and the display showed estimated fleet positions throughout human space. The number of ships indicated was far larger than anyone had expected. Of course, fleet size is less important than deployment strategy, Yuna continued. Human ships are positioned to provide mutual support, rapid response capability, and coordinated defense of critical systems. Commander Taman studied the deployment pattern with professional interest. This positioning would also allow for rapid offensive operations if necessary. Certainly, Yuna agreed. The same ships that can quickly respond to defend a colony under attack can also quickly strike at an enemy's supply lines or command centers. Flexibility is key to effective military planning. The delegates around the table were beginning to realize that they had fundamentally misunderstood humanity's position in galactic politics. The small, peaceful species that had joined the galactic community 30 years ago had quietly built one of the most sophisticated military networks in the region. Dr. Park, said Director Vulcan, the Nexari host, are you saying that humanity has been preparing for large-scale conflict while publicly advocating for peace and cooperation? Not at all, Yuna replied. We've been preparing to defend peace and cooperation against species that might prefer conquest and domination. Her eyes fixed on War Speaker Grath. We learned long ago that the best way to avoid war is to be extremely well prepared for it. Potential aggressors are much less likely to attack when they know the cost will be higher than any possible benefit. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Humanity's peaceful diplomatic approach was not based on weakness or naivety. It was backed by carefully prepared military strength that had been hidden in plain sight. War Speaker Grath looked around the room, realizing that his casual threats had revealed not only Vorthak military capabilities, but also the fact that humanity had been expecting exactly those threats. The humans hadn't just been taking notes during his boasting. They had been checking his information against their own intelligence files and finding it remarkably accurate, which meant they had been watching the Vorthak as carefully as the Vorthak thought they had been watching humanity. The Predator was beginning to understand that he might have been the prey all along. The final day of the Galactic Cooperation Summit began with a very different atmosphere than previous years. Word of the previous evening's conversation had spread through the station during the night cycle. Delegates whispered in corridors about human capabilities and War Speaker Grath's revelations about Vorthak military plans. Dr. Yuna Park arrived at the morning session carrying her usual tablet and wearing a simple blue dress. She appeared completely unchanged from the day before, greeting other delegates with the same pleasant manner she had always shown. War Speaker Grath entered the conference chamber looking less confident than usual. His ceremonial armor seemed heavier, and his usual commanding presence was subdued. Lieutenant Korak stayed close to his leader, both of them avoiding eye contact with other delegations. The formal sessions proceeded normally, with discussions of trade agreements, territorial disputes, and resource-sharing arrangements, but underneath the diplomatic language, there was a new undercurrent of caution when dealing with human representatives. During a break between sessions, War Speaker Grath approached Dr. Park privately. She was reviewing notes in a quiet corner of the station's observation lounge, watching ships move around the gas giant outside. "Dr. Park," he said formally, "I would like to clarify something about last evening's conversation." Yuna looked up from her tablet with the same interested expression she had worn during dinner. "Of course, War Speaker. What would you like to discuss?" "My comments about hypothetical military scenarios," Grath said carefully, "were purely theoretical. Exercises. Academic discussions of strategic possibilities, nothing more." "I understood that completely," Yuna replied with a warm smile. It was fascinating to hear about Vorthak tactical doctrine from such an expert source. "Thank you for sharing your insights." The War Speaker shifted uncomfortably. Her friendly response somehow made his position worse rather than better. "I want to be absolutely clear," he continued, "that the Vorthak have no hostile intentions toward humanity or any other species represented at this summit." "I'm glad to hear that," Yuna said sincerely. "Peaceful cooperation benefits everyone. War is always the most expensive option for all parties involved." "Yes," Grath agreed quickly. "Very expensive. The costs would be enormous for any species that attempted aggressive action, especially against a prepared opponent," Yuna added helpfully. "As you mentioned yesterday, successful military operations require accurate intelligence, overwhelming force, and careful planning. Any miscalculation could be catastrophic." Grath nodded, understanding that she was giving him a way to save face while making it clear that humanity was indeed a prepared opponent. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the Vorthak and human delegations could schedule future meetings to discuss mutual defense cooperation and information sharing." "That's an excellent idea," Yuna replied. "Humans always value opportunities to learn from experienced military leaders. I'm sure Captain Hyunwoo would be very interested in discussing ship design and tactical innovations with Vorthak fleet commanders." The offer sounded innocent, but Grath recognized it for what it was. The humans were proposing continued intelligence gathering disguised as military cooperation. The difference was that now they were being open about it. Meanwhile, Commander Taemin was having his own conversations with Captain Hyunwoo in another part of the station. The Corvin officer had requested a private meeting to discuss regional security arrangements. "Captain," Taemin said as they walked along one of the station's observation corridors, "I believe the Corvin Defense Fleet may have underestimated human military capabilities." "That seems to be a common problem," Hyunwoo replied diplomatically. "We try not to advertise our defensive preparations, but we don't hide them either." "Your defensive preparations are impressive," Taemin said. "I'm curious about your offensive capabilities as well." Captain Hyunwoo considered his response carefully. "Human military doctrine focuses primarily on defense and deterrence, but you're correct that effective defense often requires offensive capability." "How offensive?" Taemin asked directly. "Sufficient to ensure that any aggressor faces costs far higher than any possible benefit from attacking human space," Hyunwoo said. "We learned from studying historical conflicts that half measures often lead to longer, more destructive wars." The Corvin commander nodded appreciatively. This was the kind of clear strategic thinking he understood and respected. "The Corvin Defense Fleet would be interested in expanded cooperation agreements," Taemin said. "Joint training exercises, information sharing, coordinated patrol schedules." "Humans would welcome closer cooperation with the Corvin Fleet," Hyunwoo replied. "Your reputation for tactical excellence is well-deserved." As the day progressed, similar conversations were taking place throughout the station. The Zenthari merchants were discussing expanded trade agreements that would give them preferred access to human shipping networks. The aquatic Sithari were proposing joint exploration missions to systems that might support both species. Even the crystalline Vectar were expressing interest in cultural exchange programs. The shift in attitude toward humanity was remarkable and complete. What had been casual dismissal the day before was now careful respect, mixed with genuine wariness. During the closing ceremonies, Director Vulcan made note of the productive discussions and successful diplomatic exchanges. He specifically mentioned the value of open communication between species with different capabilities and perspectives. Dr. Una Park was asked to address the assembly about human participation in galactic cooperation. She spoke briefly about humanity's commitment to peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit through trade and cultural exchange. Humans believe that diversity of thought and capability makes all of us stronger, she said. We learn from every species we encounter, and we hope they learn from us as well. Her words were diplomatic and appropriate, but everyone in the chamber understood the deeper message. Humanity was willing to be friends with anyone, but they had learned from everyone they met and prepared accordingly. As delegations prepared to depart the station, the dynamics of galactic politics had shifted significantly. Humanity was no longer seen as the junior member of the galactic community, struggling to find their place among more established species. Instead, they were recognized as a major power that preferred peaceful cooperation, but was extremely well prepared for any alternative. Their friendship was valuable and their enmity would be catastrophic. War Speaker Grath filed his final report during the journey back to Vorthak space. His recommendations included immediate expansion of diplomatic ties with humanity, increased cultural exchange programs, and detailed reassessment of all military intelligence regarding human capabilities. Most importantly, he recommended that the Vorthak military completely abandon any theoretical planning for aggressive action against human space. The cost would be far too high, and the chances of success were effectively zero. Dr. Una Park completed her own reports during the return journey to human space. Her cultural observation files contained detailed analysis of how different species responded to displays of strength versus demonstrations of capability. Her conclusion was that humanity's approach had been successful. By allowing potential threats to reveal themselves while demonstrating preparedness rather than aggression, they had achieved a significant improvement in their diplomatic position without firing a single shot. In her final log entry, she wrote, "A recommendation that would shape human diplomatic policy for years to come. Continue current approach of peaceful cooperation backed by visible defensive capability. Ensure that our preparedness for conflict remains clearly apparent to potential aggressors while maintaining our reputation for preferring negotiation to warfare. The most effective deterrent is not the threat of what we might do, but the clear evidence of what we are prepared to do if necessary. Let other species draw their own conclusions about the wisdom of testing those preparations." As the various delegations returned to their home systems, news of the summit's discussions spread throughout the galaxy. The story of how a human diplomat had responded to casual threats with academic interest became a popular topic of conversation in diplomatic circles. More importantly, the strategic implications were not lost on military planners across known space. Humanity had quietly established themselves as a species that was extremely dangerous to threaten, even though they clearly preferred not to be threatened at all. Trade relationships with human space expanded rapidly in the months following the summit. Cultural exchange programs flourished as other species sought to better understand human thinking and capabilities. Military cooperation agreements were signed with several major powers who preferred to have humans as allies rather than opponents. This galaxy had learned an important lesson about assumptions and appearances. The small, peaceful species that asked polite questions and took careful notes was also the species that had been preparing for every possible threat with methodical thoroughness. War Speaker Grath never made casual jokes about eliminating other species again. He had learned that some prey is far more dangerous than it appears, and the most deadly predators are often the ones that smile when you threaten them. The human girl had smiled because she knew something he didn't. She knew that humanity had been expecting threats like his for decades, and they were ready for them. That smile had changed everything, and the galaxy was safer because of it. After all, when the humans smile at your threats, it means they've already figured out how to survive them. And once humans figure out how to survive something, they usually figure out how to make sure it never threatens them again. The summit had ended with new understanding all around. Some species were much more dangerous than they appeared. And some smiles were the most terrifying expressions in the galaxy.